His name was Keon. You ever heard that name before? Keon was in a children's home when we were in Trinidad. And Carl and I, while we were in Trinidad, we became part of a children's home, and we would help her out with her homework. And the house mom who took care of the children's home said she became real strict while we were there. She was strict already, but we didn't know that until we got there. And we noticed that the children were not allowed to say certain things, do certain things, and all that. And I am all about discipline, all right? Y'all know that about me, right? I'm all about discipline. But there was just kind of a discipline that was almost legalistic. Y'all familiar with that term when I say legalism? Do you know what I mean by that? It was almost an oppressive kind of discipline. And all the kids had to defend themselves and fight with one another and make sure that they didn't get in trouble, and they were just, scared to death kind of feeling. And I noticed that the leaders of the church and the children's home would constantly oppress the kids. And one of the kids that I talked to was Keon. Keon was a teenager. He was about to age out of the children's home, so he had nowhere to go. His family was all messed up on drugs, and he didn't want to really be in that environment, but he had nowhere else to go. So Carl and I, we were like, well, we got a spare bedroom. Let him come live with us. So Keon lived with us for a while, and we adopted him as our son. And he told us the stories of how all his growing up in the children's home, he was never able to ask questions without feeling shamed. He could not have honest conversation. You couldn't do anything. And we noticed in our time there that anytime we tried to work with the children, there was this kind of a governance and a watching over us. And we couldn't have honest conversations with the leaders. Now, I don't know about you, but it hurts my heart when I cannot speak freely and I can't ask questions. There was an elderly lady that came to our church years ago. Her name was Carol. Carol took pride that she was the oldest lady in the church. She said, is anyone older than me? I said, well, how old are you, Carol? I'm 79. I said, no one else is older than you by a long shot. And she smiled. Most people would be insulted by that. But Carol smiled. She goes, then I'm your senior citizen in your church. And I began to get to know Carol. I began to talk to her. Well, how'd you grow up? She goes, I grew up in a parochial school. Y'all know what a parochial school is? Anyone know what it is? What's a parochial school? No one? It's a Catholic school. And it was run by nuns, right? And the nuns had rulers and switches. Are you with me? So Carol was curious. And they would say things like, Jesus is the Son of God. She goes, well, how is he the Son of God? And they'd grab her hand and pop her knuckles with the ruler. Don't ask questions. Just believe what we tell you. Are you with me? Kind of scary, right? So, particularly people of an older generation grew up with that kind of environment. And a lot of our cultures are still that way. Now, it scares me when someone can't be open and free with their questions, because I love questions. But I was taught, when I was a kid, I told my mom, I said, Mom, how do we know, I was looking for a girlfriend. I had a girlfriend, right? But I didn't know if I wanted to keep this girlfriend because she had other things that she wanted to do, party and all that stuff. And I said, Mom, how do we know if God has sent the right one? She said, well, God will send you the right one that he wants you to have. I said, but what if she's out of God's will and goes to somebody else? And she was supposed to be for me. Mom said, well, God will give you second best. I said, I don't want second best. I want the best. And so I was able to have conversations with my mom and my family about certain things. But there were times where they couldn't answer the question, and I would keep pressing, and they'd get aggravated and say, stop asking questions. But that's how I learned. And I love asking questions. I love there to be an environment of asking questions. All right, so I need some of you to read out loud. Raise your hand if you don't mind reading out loud. Got a couple of verses here. Claire, Ephesians 4, verse 15. Josephine, Galatians 6, 1 and 2. And then one more. Somebody, Willow, Matthew 10, 14. And I lied, I have one more. Who raised your hand? What are you pointing at?
Sitting.
Sitting. Proverbs, this is real easy. Proverbs 27, 6. Proverbs 27, 6. You don't have to turn to all those. If you're going to turn to one, turn to Galatians 6. Galatians 6, verse 1 and 2. You're the Proverbs 27, 6. Okay? How many of you get nervous about asking questions? Anybody? Anybody get nervous about asking questions? How many of you grew up, well, there's a lot of teenagers here, so I don't want to, no teenagers raise their hand. But the adults here, all right, those of you who are beyond high school, and you're in college or you're anywhere from college to my age, okay? How many of you grew up where you were discouraged from asking questions? Anybody? A few. Wow, almost all the adults. It's kind of scary, right? In a moment, I'm going to ask Carla to come up here. I'm going to interview Carla because her parents don't watch this video. I can see some of you now. Let me look up her parents online. Hey, you might want to watch this video, right? And we're going to talk about how she grew up in a home where you weren't allowed to ask questions, and what that can do, and how that may affect you spiritually, and what can you do about it, okay? All right, Ephesians 4. Claire, verse 15, what does it say?
Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head.
Speaking the truth how?
In love.
In love. So how are we to speak the truth?
In love.
In love, all right? So some people don't speak the truth in love. Did the Pharisees speak the truth in love when Jesus was around? No. In fact, they oppressed people. They were constantly, if you ask a question, they were arrogant. Some people they didn't even think were worthy to ask questions. And so Jesus said, we have to speak the truth in love. Galatians 6. Who has that? Jojo, if you will read verses right at the beginning, verses 1 and 2.
Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in the spirit of gentleness.
A spirit of what? Gentleness. All right. Here's someone who's struggling. Here's someone who's not getting the relationship with God moving forward. What should we do? We should help them, support them in a spirit of what? Gentleness. I don't know about you, but I'm not always the most patient person in the world, right? Especially if I've told my kids when they were growing up, if I told them to do it 3 times, really? How many times I gotta tell you, right? And so I go from being nice to not nice, right? I don't want to have to tell you 3 times, and so I would get aggravated. And then at some point, it was almost like my kids didn't believe it until my voice got to a certain pitch. Are you with me? Some of you are smiling like, I know that deal, right? Guys, go clean up your room. Come back 10 minutes later, they're still playing video games, right? Guys, go clean up your room. Come back 10 minutes later, they're still playing video games. Hey guys, I'm not going to tell you again. Go clean up your room. Poor Aaron, right? Right in front of it. Oh, okay. Now I'm going to go clean up my room, right? So how are we to approach it? We are to approach it in a spirit of gentleness, but there is a time for harsh words. There's a time for it, but not all the time. You can't live under that oppression. All right? So, I had a moment. Oh, you didn't get to read the second verse. Go ahead and read that. Are you still there?
Yep.
All right, verse 2.
Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted.
That's important. Keep going.
Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ.
Okay, so keep watch on yourself, lest you also be tempted. Because what happens is, if someone comes at you in a certain way, like if I'm trying to be nice to somebody, and they go, well, what's it to you? How am I going to respond to that? Maybe. That usually doesn't happen to me. I usually don't get surprised. I usually mirror whatever their attitude is. Oh, you're going to talk to me like that? Well, let me tell you. Right? What are you coming at me for? Don't talk to me like that. You're not going to speak to me that way. Is that the best way to approach people? Everybody look at Carla. Carla, is that the best way to approach people? No. And early in our marriage, I had to figure out that my tone could change everything in our conversations. And to Carla and I, we struggled in our early years, especially because I would just go off or whatever, and she, one of her, if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, one of her love languages is words of affirmation. And so I could say something and not think anything about it, and it would crush her. And I'm walking on like, hey, well, she'll deal with it, right? Yeah, she would deal with it, right? So you have to learn how to speak to people in a spirit of gentleness, but you got to be careful that you don't get yourself tied up in it as well, all right? So I had a situation happen. Carla, if you'll come on up. I had a situation happen where my family got this letter from one of my cousins. And just sit right here next to Eli. Let him breathe on you real heavy, right? One of my cousins wrote this awful letter to someone else in our family. And I'm walking in the room, and I didn't know what had happened. And so I just said, so what's going on? Your cousin wrote this. I said, well, maybe he didn't mean it. He said, and they, boom. And it was, I felt such, like I had written the letter. I was just trying to say, hey, maybe we should give him the benefit of the doubt, right? And he absolutely should not have been given the benefit of the doubt once I found out what was in the letter. But the way it was told to me was, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for even thinking that he would have anything good to say. And I just remember as a teenager, I just remember like, I just felt horrible. And so if I tried to talk about it, you couldn't talk about it. All right, so what are we talking about today? Today we're talking about honest conversations. Honest conversations. Does God celebrate honest conversation? Yes or yes? Yes. Yes, God does celebrate honest conversation. He allows us to have these honest conversations for a reason. So, Carla, I don't know did you just turn these things on? I'm really a doofus when it comes to these kind of things. All right, come on up. Check. All right. Carla, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of family you grew up in and how conversations were or were not, and what you were allowed to do, what not to do?
I grew up in a family where you were told, you don't ask questions. If you did ask a question, you were being rebellious. Even if it was a valid question, you just do what you're told. My dad was a pastor, so I grew up in a pastor's home, and there was also the pressure of being the perfect child, being a preacher's kid. So that's the kind of environment I grew up in. If there was ever any conflict, it wasn't discussed, it was just swept under the rug, you deal with it, you hope it blows over, that kind of situation.
So, does everybody know what she means when she says sweep it under the rug? Do people still say that? Okay. You just don't deal with it, right? And act like it never happened, okay? So, in that environment, what did you learn to do to negotiate that personally? What happened to your sister? What happened to you as a result?
My temperament was, I was very compliant. I did whatever I didn't ask questions. If I did have a question, I just kind of internalized it and, okay, just figure it out for yourself, or just don't even think about the question. My sister, on the other hand, was very questioning. She was interpreted by my parents as being rebellious because she did ask questions, and she didn't step back from her questions. She would ask questions, and because we were not allowed to ask questions, she would be perceived as being rebellious. Why don't you just do what you're told to do? So she ended up leaving our family years later, and we haven't had contact with her in 25 years. So we responded differently because of who we are and our personalities, and she responded in a way that she didn't want to live like that anymore. And I responded in just, going with the flow and just doing my thing.
Yeah. So what did you do personally? What were some of the things that you had to hide or do or act or as a result?
I walked on eggshells constantly, if you're familiar with that idiom. You just never knew if things were okay or not because you couldn't ask questions. If you came home from school and your parents were obviously annoyed about something, you just, okay, I'm just going to go to my room. There were things that I wanted to do that I knew that they would not agree with, so I went behind their backs. I hid things. I did things that I knew they wouldn't approve of, and I hid things well. I became a liar. I'm not proud of that, but in order to do the things that I wanted to do, I knew they weren't necessarily wrong. I just knew my parents wouldn't agree with those things, so I began to hide and just not ask their permission, not ask questions, that kind of thing.
Did you have a boyfriend that they didn't know about?
I did have a boyfriend.
And are you still in touch with him today?
No.
I'll leave it at that. Yeah. Just kidding. Yeah. Leah was like, oh, thank goodness, Here's the deal, guys. If you don't have full expression, you're gonna react in one of two ways, and if not other ways that I'm not thinking of. You're either going to back off and say, you know what, I'm gonna have to hide and lie and cheat and try to get around my parents and not say certain things to them because they're gonna get upset about it or whatever. Or you're gonna do like her sister, who said, I'm done with this. I'm just going to run away and leave and never contact them again. And both of those ways are not a healthy way to respond. So some of you may have extended families or whatever to this day, adults. Your older parent, you may to this day have to say certain things a certain way, because you're scared. You're scared to set them off, or you're scared to bring something up or ask a question or whatever. What are some of the ways, I'm asking the adults, I kind of want to be sensitive with teenagers here. We're not here to talk about your family and what they do, what they don't do. But do you have some generic questions about how would you approach living in a family as such, even whether you live in that kind of family or not? How do you currently deal with it? Some of you adults who raise your hands, if you're willing to share, how do you currently deal with it? And how are you able to maintain your integrity in the midst of it? Anybody willing to say something about that? I'm putting a lot of people on the spot here, so I'm not trying to. Ivan?
I always say a lot of times, I know where the hot buttons are.
Right.
So just avoid the hot buttons. Like, my brother is very short-tempered, and anything can set him off. So just...
Anything will or won't?
Well, set
Oh, anything.
Just about anything.
Yeah.
So we just, we kind of learn, even my parents learn not to say certain things around him,
Yeah.
It's like treating like one of the C4 bomb that's triggered, that's wired to blow off any time, so just,
Right.
kind of tiptoe around.
Mm-hmm. I get that. Anyone else?
Like Ivan said, for me, the peace was huge. I wanted to keep the peace no matter what, so I wanted to avoid situations that I knew were gonna blow up for the sake of the peace. And that bled over into my adult life where I, rather than facing things head on and having conversations about those things with people, I just would clam up and just do whatever to keep the peace, good or bad.
Yeah, including in our relationship early on. Carla and I were just getting to know each other. We'd been dating a few months, and I was part of this haunted house. It was a Christian haunted house, if you can call it that. But I was in charge of one of the rooms in the house, and I had created this, there was a bridge in the room. Nobody knew what to do with this room. And there was a bridge in the room, and every attempt to do something with this bridge failed. And they thought, Darren, you willing to take the challenge? I said, I'm willing to take the challenge. Give it to me, right? So I ended up putting all this black plastic sheeting along the edge of this bridge. I didn't make it a whole room. I made the rest of the room where people could hide behind the plastic sheeting. And then I went out in the woods and I chopped down all these little trees. And I put all these trees in front of the plastic sheeting so that when people came into the room, it looked like woods. It looked like you're walking into a forest. The problem was you couldn't see behind the trees. So I cut all these slits, and take me a while, these slits in the plastic, and people had white gloves on behind there. And so I put black lights up. And while people are walking and looking around, and we've got a speaker in the back, it's got this whoosh, you're in the woods and everything. All of a sudden, these people would put their white glove through the slit, and it just freaked everybody out, right? But the greatest thing that I really enjoyed was at the end of the bridge, there was a what I call a squirrel cage fan. You find them in an old gymnasium. A squirrel cage fan. And you plug that thing in and it would blow, and so you walk in there and the wind's blowing and all of that. And the problem was that the squirrel cage fan wasn't working. So I had to go to work, and I told Carla, I said, go with me and let's get this thing knocked out. I'm going to change that pin in that fan and it'll work. And we can have wind for tonight. Well, I go there, and you know how it is. You go to work on something that's supposed to be simple, and was it simple?
Probably not.
No. I've got a hammer, I'm banging that pin, it won't come out. I got the wrench, and it won't come out, and the pin just won't come out. And I turned into the Incredible Hulk. The veins on my neck began to bulge and all that, and I just grabbed that hammer, and I just started banging on that motor, because that's what good mechanics do when you're working on things, right? I started banging on that motor, and the pin would never come out, and I just slung the hammer, and there's Carla, who'd never seen this before, and she's over there like, I could have given her popcorn at that point, and she'd have just been, like, so I said, well, forget the whole thing, let's just go, I gotta go to work. And so I said, I'll take you back to your dorm, and I'll go on to work. The whole way back, she's quiet as all get out. She's just staring straight ahead. Why? Because she grew up in a family, you don't talk about this stuff. You sweep it under the rug. Somebody's mad, leave them alone. Eggshells, right? I kind of grew up in a similar environment. But I was cool. I'm over it now. Yeah, the fan's not in front of me anymore. I could get over this stuff. Carla's over there not getting over it. She's just stewing inside. Right? I bring her back to the dorm. I'm going to be a gentleman. I'm going to walk her to the door, right? So I'm walking her to the door, and she's in front of me. About halfway to the dorm, she does this. I didn't grow up with that kind of anger, and I'm not going to put up with it. and my French poodle turned into a Doberman Pinscher. It freaked me out because I've never seen Carla react so violently to me, right? She said, I'm not going to have this kind of, her dad, very calm. He worked on lawnmowers to this day. If the thing falls apart, it's just like, well, we'll work on it some more later, and I'll get another part. And he's just real patient. I'm over there like, I'm trying to rip everything apart, right? How many of you are familiar with the Incredible Hulk character in your family? You know what I'm talking about, right? Some of you are going, this is being filmed. I'm not going to raise my hand. We know who you're talking about, right? How many of you, your parents and or aunts or uncles and or influential people in your life, you're just amazed by their patience and how patient they are? 2 people. 3. Oh, we got 3. Oh, that's good. All right. It is amazing the level of patience some people have. I didn't grow up with it. My dad was the Incredible Hulk, and I learned how to act just like he did, right? And so you have to be careful, but you have to be able to talk about these things. And Carla and I, later, we realized if we're going to have a good marriage, we've got to figure out how to have honest conversations. Because we weren't having the honest conversation, because things would come up and I would get mad and I'd give her the silent treatment, or she'd get mad, she'd give me the silent treatment, right? I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Silent treatment, right? My parents, at times, would give me the silent treatment. Well, they were actually trying to be merciful. Because if I pressed them while they weren't ready to talk about it, they wasn't a good time to talk about it. Are you with me? But Jesus calls us to learn how to have honest conversations with one another. He says to be gentle. He says to be forthright, right? Who has Proverbs 27, verse 6? All right, Shanine, read it loud and clear.
6.
Proverbs 27, verse 6.
Wounds from a friend have you. An enemy multiplies.
Okay, wounds of a friend can be what? Trusting.
This is
Wounds of a friend can be trusting. What is that saying? How many of you want to be wounded by your friends? You've been playing too many video games, right?
sounds good.
So what does it mean? What is that trying to say, Joseph? So if a friend is being truthful for you, even if the truth hurts, that's a good thing, right? Right? And then what was the second part of the verse?
Enemies can multiply.
So an enemy who gives flattery, oh, you're the most wonderful person in the world. Oh, I just love you. Oh. You kind of know, I might want to steer clear of this person, right? Because the person that's saying you're so wonderful and saying everyone else is not so wonderful, one day it's going to talk to someone else and say you're not wonderful. So don't believe flattery. Don't believe flattery, but welcome the wounds from a friend who's willing to have an honest conversation with you. Amen? All right, so what is this? What are we talking about here? We're talking about defensiveness. Some of you right now are struggling with defensiveness. What's the problem with defensiveness? Someone describe to me what defensiveness is. Leo?
The preemptive instinct to go against someone's says without even knowing.
Okay, so a preemptive, what do you call that? Preemptive what?
Instinct to go against someone's says
Okay.
without even knowing.
So the preemptive instinct to go against what someone is saying before they even know where they're coming from with it, right? So you're defensive, but when you wake up, you're defensive, right? Where did defensiveness come from? Pride. What else? That's a good one. Pride. Where else did defensiveness come from? Huh?
Maybe like stress.
Stress, being stressed.
You want like
Okay, very good. Yep. Where else did it come from?
Shame.
Shame. We could have a whole sermon on shame. Because I know Asian culture, and people pick on the Asians about this. But the truth is, it's human nature. I don't care what race you are. to shame people into manipulating people through shame what you want them to do or how you want them to act. Right? How many of you, don't raise your hand. Nobody raise their hand, okay? This is not something to be proud about. How many of you find yourself using derogatory words or shame to manipulate your circumstances? I find that I do it, right? I can disregard somebody at times, and I say, oh, as soon as I say, oh, don't listen to anything I say after that. Oh, yeah, and then the sarcasm comes, right? Right. Some of you that sits home a little close. It's very dangerous to grow up in a Christian home that uses shame when Jesus came to die for that shame. If Jesus died for that shame, not only died for our sins, but the guilt and the shame around that sin, he died for it, right? If Jesus died for that, and he took away our shame and our guilt, oh my goodness, who are we to use that same shame and guilt on other people? We shouldn't do that. We should be more open. Even if someone else seems to be trying to manipulate us, we should be open and redirect that conversation. All right, who's got Matthew 10:14? Willow, let's hear it.
And if anyone will not receive you, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave the house or pond.
Okay, if someone will not listen to you, what do you do?
Shake off the dust from your feet when you leave the house or pond.
Okay, anyone heard that phrase before? You shake the dust from your feet? How many of you don't know what I'm talking about? Shake the dust from your feet. How many of you don't know? Amy's the only one? Daniel, never heard of it? Anybody else? Never heard of it? Never heard of it? Okay, basically what you do, when Jesus sent the disciples out to evangelize people and they give them the good news, right? They look for a person of peace. Repeat after me, person of peace.
Person of peace.
Say it again.
Person of peace.
One more time.
Person of peace.
Person of peace. Okay? Not person of peas. Not somebody who likes peas. Person of peace. What is a person of peace? A person of peace is someone who's curious and open to the things of God and to you as a person. Right? What's the opposite of a person of peace?
Offensive.
A person of defensiveness, right? If they're defensive and they won't listen to you, and you're trying to give them good news, Jesus said, shake the dust from your feet. So, if you have defensive people in your family, if you have people, friends, some of you, like I did, I needed to get rid of some of my friends in middle school. One of my middle school friends' name was Mike. Mike was a horrible person. Mike was guilt, shame. He was the best. Nobody could get anything over on him. If you did anything, he wouldn't celebrate it with you. He was just constantly talking bad about people. And I did everything I could as a middle schooler to please Mike. I just wanted Mike to be happy with me. Was Mike ever going to be happy with me? No. Mike was never going to be happy with me. And I continued to be his friend for 3 years. You know how I stopped being his friend? My parents moved our family away from Mike. No lie. They moved away because I was an idiot.
Fire thing.
Yeah, the whole arson, burning the man's house down, all that stuff, right? If you want to hear that story, talk to me later, okay? That was a horrible situation, but it was influenced by these friends I had surrounded myself with. And it wasn't until I moved away that I was able to get out of that defensiveness and that wanting to please and that wanting to be liked by somebody, that God was able to say, hey, you don't have to live this life. There is another life. There is good news. Jesus will accept you, take you as you are, and he won't leave you there. He wants you to grow up. Some of you need to grow up. Did you hear what I said? I'm talking to adults too. Okay, how old you are? I got to look at myself in the mirror sometimes and say, you know what, Darren, you need to grow up. You need to get over yourself, right? Some of you need to grow up and start having honest conversations with yourself and with the people around you. And quit shaming and guilting everyone else around you to manipulate the relationship. It's not healthy, it's not good, and it's not godly. There should be a sense of freedom in our families. Now, Darren, what do I do if I'm in a situation where I can't really get out of it? You know, I live in a certain situation or whatever. It's important that you have some people that you can be honest with. I didn't have any people I could be honest with when I was friends with Mike, because all my friends were idiots. Literally all of them. And that made me an idiot, right? My choice. You gotta find people that you can be open with and honest with. It's important who your friends are, right? Here's a couple of things to think about. God, who created emotions? God. So do you have anger?
Yeah.
Right? Do you have sadness? Yeah. Is the grieving process something God given you? Okay. Do you have joy? Where does joy come from? God. Okay. So let's talk about this. We're going to wrap it up with this thought. Okay. The dashboard of your emotions. Okay. Imagine me driving my car and the check engine light comes on. Darren, you need to check under the hood because something's wrong. And I take a piece of electrical tape and I put it over the check engine light. And I go, that'll fix it. Now I don't have to look at the check engine light. Are you with me? Your emotions are the check engine light of your life. Darren, what do you mean by that? If you are angry, it's because you've been violated in some way. You've been abused, or you haven't been heard, or maybe there's just something going on that you need a sense of justice to happen. I get that way when I watch movies. I always want the bad guy to get it in the end, right? Right? Yeah. I don't watch movies and go, that poor bad guy. He just had a hard childhood. He should be forgiven. I don't think that way. I want him to get it in the end, right? Because I have a mind of justice, right? But I also have an anger problem, right? So if you're all about justice all the time, you will have an anger problem, okay? So what does that light, the anger light tell you? It tells you that you have a sense of justice. You have a sense of violation. You need to look at that. You need to put the hood up and look. That's the first thing you do when you're trying to have an honest conversation is look in your own heart, the Bible says, right? Let a man examine himself. All right, what about sadness? What is sadness? If you pop the hood on sadness, what's there? What causes sadness?
Loss.
Sense of loss. Perfect, right? A sense of loss. Something should have happened and it didn't happen. I have a sense of loss, right? I have a lack of freedom for expression. Right? I can't express myself. I want to talk to somebody important to me and they won't let me talk to them because they don't know how to have honest conversation. That brings sadness. Right? That's what Carla experienced in her family. Right? I didn't experience sadness, I experienced anger. It's worth looking at, right? What about depression? It sounds a lot like sadness, but depression and sadness are two different things. Sadness is in the moment, and you get over it. Depression is just this undercurrent of sadness that's always there. What does depression come from? Anybody know?
Not being grateful.
Yep. Here's the main culprit of depression. Ongoing, unmet expectations. Ongoing, unmet expectation. You cannot rise above the hard times. Life is unfair. This isn't this is not what I signed up for. I had an expectation that my life was going to turn out differently. And you just had this overall, my life isn't what it should be. And that comes from, that depression does that, right? Now, where does happiness come from?
Gaining something.
Huh?
Gaining something.
Gaining something? Okay. Yeah, certainly could be. If depression is not rising above hard times, what can happiness be?
Rising hope.
Actually rising above the hard times. Going, you know what? Life sucks sometimes. Life is hard sometimes. And it's okay. Because God is building my character to rise above the hard times. Most people who are depressed, this is a little tricky when I say this, okay? But I've done enough counseling where I've seen it over and over and over again. The people who overcome depression are the people who overcome the unfairness of their situation. And they realize that God is building their character through these situations. Job never cursed God. Now hey, this shouldn't be happening to me. He did say it was unfair, but he never cursed God. Why? Because he understood that God was building his character. Right? Any thoughts on that? All right, sense of accomplishment, plan, expectations are actually met. All right, I could keep going, but when your lights go off on the dashboard of your emotion, you have to look at what's happening so that God can take you to a place that he wants you to go. And that he is our hope, he is our joy, he is the honest one with us. And I pray that if someone is struggling with how to interact with friends or family members or whatever, Lord, I pray that you would give them a sense of your presence and comfort and joy and a choice to not complain about life, but to embrace the unfairness of life so that their character can become like your character. And I just pray, Lord, as we encourage one another and build each other up, that your kingdom would benefit from it, Lord, and that we become part of that kingdom and spreading the good news that there's joy and there's hope in Jesus Christ. In his name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right.